Hello, everyone. Scott Hebner here. I really appreciate you joining me for this episode of the Next Frontiers of AI podcast. Over the last 7 weeks, we have featured industry pioneers that are helping to shape the future of AI. That included BMW, Fitch Ratings, Scanby, Geminos, G2, and we were able to hear from them their visions of what's going to happen as we go forward. And it was all anchored in AI agents that can actually make trustworthy decisions. As a result, I have received a ton of interest and a bunch of input and feedback, and even many questions on how to go about building decision intelligence into AI agents. So today, I'm going solo. I'm going to try to outline here my point of view from what I've learned from these industry pioneers and other experts, and kind of frame it within a strategic approach on how to enable decision intelligence in these agents. Basically a summary of what is needed to create AI agents that can actually truly make decisions. And those decisions are trustworthy and explainable. So let's do it. Let's jump right into it here. And I think, obviously, it starts with what I think is a lot of discussion out in the marketplace as I watch it. But how do you actually define an AI agent? And what I've learned from the people I've been talking to, you can see the chart here, is this sort of progression, right? We're all accustomed to AI assistants. They are fueled by LLMs and generative AI. They're really good at being able to automate simple tasks, repeatable tasks. They can analyze information for us. They can create content. When they're connected up to predictive models, they're able to make predictions. A lot of value, right? And we've seen this happening over the last 2 to 3 years. And it has really changed the landscape of what companies are trying to do in their IT and digital business efforts. This year in 2025, we're seeing the rise of AI agents and agentic AI. So an AI agent, in my view, builds upon an assistant to actually be able to pursue a goal, right? To help people problem solve and to actually make decisions. And this is where the rise of decision intelligence becomes critically important. And then agentic AI is when you're able to take multiple agents and sort of wire them together into a framework, into a network or a system. And collectively, they can plan action paths and orchestrate workflows that involve not just an individual, but an entire organization. And they're able to take autonomous actions to help move things forward. More of an organizational approach to leveraging agents versus AI agents that perhaps maybe just for an individual. This is how I've interpreted what I've been hearing out in the marketplace. And I'll be really curious to what you think and what you're hearing out there, because clearly without a definition, everyone's going to start to call everything an AI agent and everything's going to be agentic AI, and then we're going to lose the differentiation. But let me just kind of go on to the next view here. Is what does a decision-making agent actually do, right? And more importantly, I think, is what does the future look like? And this may not be this year, it may not be next year, it may not be the year after. On the other hand, it could be. But what we need is agents that can help humans understand the precise chain of events that leads to a desired outcome, right? They're going to need to know why things happen, right? They're going to need to understand consequences of various actions or decisions that they're going to recommend. And how do they know which one is the best among multiple options, right? They're going to need to help people actually engage and interrogate the agent, to ask what if questions, right? To discover, how does my business actually operate, right? What are the causal effects on different actions, different conditions, different interventions that I can make? How does that change an outcome, right? What are the root causes of a particular problem I have? What happens if I do counterfactual analysis and I can say, well, look, I'm going to change the inflation rate in Switzerland to this, and I'm going to change the bond projection in the United States to that. What is that going to do to the overall bond market, for example? So these agents are going to need to be able to interact with humans to do what if scenarios and to simulate different hypothetical approaches to solving a problem. And then perhaps most importantly, given those three things, is it's going to have to be able to explain the how and the why of the decision or an action, right? Because people are only going to trust what they understand. And the only way they're going to understand why something is worth doing is if the agent can actually explain to the human, why this is the right approach to take. So I think this sort of represents a snapshot of sometime in the future what we should be striving for in terms of creating decision intelligence agents. Now, another thing that I've really learned and has become crystal clear from all my discussions is that generative AI and LLMs alone are insufficient in creating AI agents, I think in general, but certainly decision intelligence-based agents. And why is that? Well, first of all, they operate on correlation. They're correlative in design, where they're crunching through huge, massive lakes of data, and they're essentially identifying statistical probabilities that create patterns and correlations among different parts of the data set, and therefore are able to make a prediction for what may happen in the future based on what has happened in the past, right? But predictions are not judgments. And a judgment is needed, right? Judgment is basically based on consequences. When you make a judgment, you're thinking through what are the consequences of different potential paths forward, right? And it's consequences that then inform how you make a decision. Then, of course, as we said before, a decision must be explained. So generative AI and LLMs have created a critical foundation. I equate them to the browsers of the early internet age, where the browser created a gateway into the internet. And the value came over time as people built around and on top of those browsers to create all new kinds of innovations in business value. I think the same thing's happening here with generative AI and LLMs. They become part of the foundation. They create a gateway into the world of AI, but the value will come on how you build around and on top of the LLMs, leveraging the generative AI services to address these problems, right? These limitations is probably a better word. Because if you don't, the agents won't be able to explain themselves. They won't be able to adapt to changing conditions. They're certainly going to be prone to bias and inaccuracies. With no notion of consequence, they're not going to be able to have a discussion with you, if you will, on what the right approach is. And that includes doing counterfactual kind of analysis. They're just simply insufficient to be able to do this alone. So it's my strong belief that if you look under the tip of the iceberg, under the water, if you will, of what needs to be created to fuel these agents, it's going to be powered by an AI model ecosystem that equips agents with domain knowledge, with reasoning capabilities, with explainability, all within a unified framework. So it's taking LLMs and generative AI and complementing it and extending it with these extended specialized models. That's going to become what's going to be under the waterline, if you will, of the iceberg, right? Above the waterline being the agents and how they're wired together into agentic frameworks. And that's what we're starting to see be built out in numerous businesses. There's vendors that are, coming on the scene with new innovations. And we've heard from a lot of them over the last many weeks here on this podcast. So that brings us to the journey, right? And how do you kind of go about building this ecosystem? So when you look at the chart here, it starts, as I said, with your foundation, generative AI services, and the LLMs, right? And step one is you need to have domain-specific knowledge, right? Whether it be for, how you process legal precedent when you're doing contracts, or whether it is about customer service, or it's about clinical drug trials. You have to have that domain intelligence that extends the more generalized knowledge that are in the LLMs. So that's step one. The second step is you need semantic knowledge or semantic reasoning. And that's where knowledge graphs come in, for example, so that you understand the relationships between entities in a problem set. And it helps you understand the context of the problem or the decision that you're thinking about, as well as the meaning on how one thing relates to another, right? Again, that's another step in the progression here of creating more and more reasoning and therefore decision intelligence. From there, you need to build into what I'm referring to here as causal reasoning, distinct from semantic, because causal reasoning understands the cause and effect mechanisms across a system of decisions and sub-decisions. Think of it as a causal knowledge graph that not only has the entities and the relationships among the entities, but it also can tell you the cause and effect among those entities. And if you change variables in one place, how does it affect variables in another? And if you make a decision in one part of the graph, how does it affect a decision that's being made somewhere else in the graph? And just like human beings, everything we do, for the most part, almost everything we do, involves causal reasoning, right? We think about cause and effect in almost everything that we do. And as I've said in past podcasts, the alarm clock goes off. It's like, do I hit snooze or do I just get up? And you're immediately thinking about the pros and cons or the cause and effect of whichever decision I make. AI is going to need to be able to do that. And then I think the ultimate power, at least over the next many years, is going to be when you start taking those models and you're able to wire them together and wire agents into them, into a network or a system where they sort of act like swarm intelligence, where they may all have specialties, but they learn from each other, right? And they're able to collectively make decisions. So I think this is the roadmap that we're on into the future. And as you move down this roadmap, you get into more progressive ability to actually make trustworthy decisions from an AI point of view. All right, so let's just dive a little bit deeper into these technologies, just to give you a little bit of insight into how this comes to life. And again, this is what I've pieced together from all the conversations I've had. So when you think about these decision intelligence type of technologies, I think step number one, if you will, is chain of thought. And you see this first in the open AI, ChatGPT. I think it was 4.0 or 4.0 mini, or one of the two that first came out with chain of thought, where it's still correlative in nature, but it's able to think about what it's doing, go backwards and rethink things. It learns better. It's a little bit more of a thoughtful approach to coming out with a correlative outcome. Because basically it's breaking the problem into logical steps that are then dynamically evaluated and revisited until you get to a desired outcome that you think is right. And there's other things that are added to this, like attention transformers, and there's reinforcement learning with human feedback. Not only at the model level, but also at the token level, if you will. So it's a very sophisticated set of technologies that take a major step forward. And I think it's very important in the progression of decision intelligence. Step two, as we said before, is semantic reasoning. This is where you're able to interpret the underlying context and relationships and the concepts in a much more logical manner of how entities relate to each other. Things like workflows, or a customer record is related to a service call, which is related to the product that they bought, which was related to what part of the country they bought it, and so on and so forth. That's where knowledge graphs become really important. You're seeing more and more people using GraphRag, which can keep those knowledge graphs up to date and learning. And you're even seeing neurosymbolic AI that merges neural networks with knowledge graphs that can actually deal with more complex problems, and it's able to sort of learn the knowledge graphs in real time as it learns. That's giving you the semantic reasoning. Causal reasoning, this is where you're able to understand how and why things actually happen and the consequences of actions. So simply put, cause and effect. And there's new technologies out there, like we talked about last week with Stuart Frost from Geminos, a causal knowledge graph. So it's an advancement of the knowledge graph that then builds in the causal effects. And there's causal RAG that operates in a very similar way to GraphRag, right? It allows you to integrate LLMs and generative AI into your causal knowledge graph to not only build it in the first place, but to inform the LLM about the causal learnings, right? And it creates a circular learning loop, right? And then I even, think you're going to start to see, and I know there's a lot of, research going on in this space, but this notion of a causal neural network that again fuses a causal knowledge graph with a neural network that gives you another level of sophistication. This is all happening today. There's tons of vendors out there today that provide these solutions, and I think it's going to become more mainstream as we go through time here. And then finally, as I said before, how do you wire these things together to have even a higher degree of decision intelligence, right? Swarm, if you will. And that's where you get into multi-agent RAG, you get into imitation reinforcement learning, where you're imitating the outcomes that other agents or models were able to accomplish, and the notion of swarm intelligence or swarm AI. So a lot of these technologies are out there, and there's some people that have implemented them. They're going to become more and more mainstream as we go through time here, as they get democratized by different vendors in the marketplace. So let's kind of translate that into the world of agents. And I've sort of pulled a chart together here that basically outlines the tiers of sophistication, right? Very high level, obviously. But if you think of a domain intelligence agent that understands a specific domain, like legal precedent when doing contracts, it acts based on what has happened in the past and what it has learned, right? It can help you automate how you make a decision in that case and give you the information you need. It's going to recognize patterns and anomalies. It's going to help you basically predict and forecast what may happen, right? Given what has happened in the past. So you can, in this case, on the bottom in blue, you can ask a question like, what is the primary driver of customer retention? And it will be able to predict what that primary driver is. And it can usually do it with good accuracy. But predicting it is very different than understanding why it happened, what the root cause of it was, and how do I improve it, right? And that starts getting you to the next level of sophistication, which is the semantic reasoning agent. And again, that kind of agent is going to act on semantic structures and contextual knowledge of a problem set. So it's going to be able to navigate these entities and the relationships among them. It's going to be able to help the human or the business understand context and meaning of the decision they're trying to make, right? It's going to understand the ontology of the actual organization or of some knowledge set. And in many cases, it starts to infuse in expert know-how, like how to go about writing a contract or how to go about, keeping customers and retaining them. So an example there would be not just asking what the primary driver is, but asking how does the newsletter influence customer retention, right? So now it can actually tell you semantically, yes, I know that I now know that the primary drivers of customer retention is getting the newsletters and being kept up to date, right? But how, and why is that newsletter, influencing this better retention, right? So it gives you another step in the decision-making process. And then a causal agent, that can reason with cause and effect, then is able to act on, basically reasoned decisions, right? They're going to be able to infer the consequences of different potential action paths. And this is where I think you start to get to true decision intelligence, right? Because you have interactive explainability, you have interactive capabilities to do what-if scenarios and do counterfactual analysis and ask it, what if? So the example here being, what happens if we then increase the send rates for the newsletter by 20%? Will that further increase customer retention, right? And it will be able to model out. Or if you say, what happens if I do it 10% more? Or what happens if I send out fewer newsletters? You're going to be able to do the what-if scenarios, right? Or what happens if you were to change some of the conditions of like how the newsletter looks, how it gets received, what time it gets received, right? That's counterfactual sort of reasoning. You can do all that stuff with a causal agent. And therefore, it's going to help you really decide what to do because you're going to understand the consequences of different potential actions. And then finally, the planning and orchestration agents, those are the ones that know how to plan, they know how to coordinate the intelligence across multiple agents in a workflow. It's going to be able to tap into the specialization of different agents. So this is where you start to get contextual perception of a bigger environment that the agent's trying to make a decision in, right? Not just if I send a newsletter out, right? But what other interventions will reduce the cost or the loss of customers, right? Give me some ideas of what other things I can do. And this is where it works a little bit more autonomously. It goes out, the agents do their work, right? It can have dynamic pathways and a whole bunch of different ones where they're playing off each other, and where one decision in one place will affect decisions in another place of the workflow, right? So it's sort of like indirect multi-hop reasoning, but with real causal reasoning under the covers. That's how I see all this over time, creating more and more sophisticated AI agents that ultimately get wired together into these agentic frameworks. One more point here, which you can see where this is all leading. I do think over the next couple of years, this idea and this emerging technology around causal AI, that's the secret sauce, I think, or the secret ingredient that's going to really progress decision intelligence. We're tracking here at the Cube Research 20 or so vendors that are actively providing solutions today that help businesses infuse causal reasoning or cause and effect, or causal knowledge graphs. All the big guys out there, and name it, OpenAI, Meta, IBM. There's a bunch of them out there that are doing a ton of research and development in this area. And the bottom line, though, is if you sort of just look at the progression of interest here, back in 2022, very little search, very little interest in causal AI. But you can see how it's really ramped up over the last several years and is really starting to turn into a hockey stick, because people are starting to realize that to make decisions, you got to make judgments. To have judgments, you need to understand cause and effect. And therefore, AI is going to have to slowly but surely build that kind of capability. And what's nice about this, it's not rip and replace. It's a progressive technology roadmap where you're building upon the previous layer, right? You have LLMs and generative AI, then you have the knowledge domain models, and then you infuse the knowledge graphs, and then you have the causal knowledge graphs, and it's progressive, right? And a survey that Data IQ and Databricks did, I think it was a couple of years ago, you can see the numbers here, right? There were 16% of 400 AI professionals that were actively using causal AI already, another 33% that were experimenting, and 25% that plan to evaluate. So by the end of 2026, at least this survey estimates 7 out of 10 will be involved in the notion of causality in AI, which again, I think becomes really important if you want to be able to enable these decision intelligence-based agents. And that's where I think this is all going. There's just no doubt in my mind here. And it's what's going to allow us to move from correlations to reasoning, from predictions to decisions, from tasks to goals, from black boxes to explanations, and really from fear to trust, right? I think trust is the currency of innovation. The more sophisticated the AI gets, the more it is able to actually do, the more trust becomes important, because people aren't going to just blindly trust an agent to make a decision, not only because people only trust what they understand for the most part, but there's regulatory requirements and all those kind of things that become really important here. So we'll see where this all heads into the future. I'm excited about it, and I'm looking forward to hearing more and more from our pioneers that will be on these podcasts. I would love to hear from you guys on LinkedIn, or you can leave some comments here. Really trying to shape a point of view here on what's really going to happen. In addition to that, please mark your calendars for April 16th. We will be hosting an industry-unique summit featuring industry pioneers discussing how to build AI agents in agentic systems, which of course will include tips and techniques on how to create these agents that can actually make decisions, as well as everything else you'll need, like domain models and pre-built agent marketplaces and agentic frameworks. So I hope you'll join us, and please contact me on LinkedIn if you'd like to learn more about the summit, because it's coming up quick. All right, well, it's time to wrap up. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on the Next Frontiers of AI podcast. I so appreciate you being here. Please let me know, again, what you think. I'm trying to take in as many inputs as I can. And stay tuned for more research and analysis from our team as we dive deeper into what's shaping the future of AI in business. Visit us at thecuberesearch.com, siliconangle.com to stay connected and to access all of our research and podcasts from across the team. We are the leader in tech news and analysis. Bye until next time.